Hello, and welcome to our Intersectionality Awareness Week panel. My name is Katie Hudson, and I'm the chair of Parapride, a charity that supports the disabled LGBTQIA community. And I am very delighted to welcome a panel of amazing speakers today who are folks who are representing the trans disabled community today, and that's the topic of our panel discussion called Access Denied. And we're going to explore lots of topics in this domain that affect the trans disabled community and try and give a sense of what it is like to be a member of a variety of intersectional identities and to have various experiences in that sense. So I will just do a very quick visual introduction of myself. So I'm a woman and I am kind of late 40s, have dirty blonde hair, glasses, and I'm wearing a green top, although I'm not sure that's visible in the video. But that's me. And I'm now going to hand off to our wonderful panelist speakers to introduce themselves. If I can start perhaps with Sarah.
Oh, yeah, hi, great to be here. My name is Sarah Stevenson. My pronouns are she, her. Just in terms of a visual description, I'm a middle-aged white woman, long reddish brown hair. I'm wearing a black headset and I've got a sort of coral short sleeve dress with the V-neck and a dark crystal necklace on. And the work I do, so I've spent a lot of time working in the EDI world, but I now look at there's experiences in life. My sort of tagline is when nothing is wrong, but something doesn't quite feel right. So I help people navigate those shifts, those transitions in life, whether that's identity, work, family, whatever, and making sense of that individually and organizationally. I'm a trans woman. I'm totally blind, and I also have some hidden disabilities. So that's me.
Thank you, Sarah. May I go next to Bobby, please?
Yeah, thank you so much, Kate. It's lovely to be here. My name's Bobby Pickard. I'm the Chief Executive of Trans in the City, an organisation that helps trans and non-binary people in business and also helps businesses as well to become more trans and non-binary inclusive. I'm patron of Flag and Swindon and Wiltshire Pride. Um, I'm trustee of Chippenham Pride and I am Golden Champion of Stonewall Housing. Visual description of me: I'm white in my late 50s. I'm a trans woman. I have long blonde hair, wearing a black vest today, and my pronouns are she and they.
And finally, Hufsa.
Hi everyone, I'm Hafsa. My pronouns are they and he. I'm a director of Transactional for Wellbeing and Resources. In my day job, I also specialist lecture on things like race, inclusion, disability. As a visual descriptor, I'm wearing black headphones. I've got a purple head wrap on. You can't see it. I've got sort of a pink top on, and yeah, that's me.
Thank you so much. And I do want to say thank you to Lynn, who's also doing our BSL interpreting today. And she is hopefully visible to everyone. And we also have captions on this panel, so hopefully everyone can follow along as we go through the questions. I will start by saying, by asking the question, intersectionality. Some of the people that are watching this panel may or may not be familiar with that kind of topic. And I'm interested to, obviously, intersectionality might mean something different to every different person. And so I'm really interested to understand from each of our panelists, first of all, what intersectionality means in your day-to-day life, how your different identities show up and interact in the ways that people might not immediately see. And I'm also aware, this panel is about the trans disabled experience, but there are many other aspects of intersectionality that we've already talked when we've had our preparatory calls. So really interested to just hear everyone's perspective on that. And can I maybe start with us and kind of do a slightly different order this time?
Yeah, sure. In terms of intersectionality, I'm someone who also has what's called, quote unquote, doing air quotes, invisible disabilities, where I have arthritis, and a lot of people assume that older people get arthritis. I'm someone who's sort of Well, I'm in my early 30s. I've been told I look young. Who knows what that means though? And I'm often assumed to not have any disabilities when I walk into a space. I used to use a walking stick. I don't currently at the moment. That might change. Um, and this affects how I'm perceived when I go into a space, especially if I'm entering a queer space where people assume looking at me because I am Muslim, because I'm wearing hijab, I cover my hair, that I might not be queer or that I'm not trans or that I can't hold the same identities that they do, as well as not being disabled. So I walk into a space, people will not offer me consider my access needs in terms of, do you need a lift? Are you able to access the venue? Is it easy to get to? Have we signposted to you? But at the same time, I've been to events where someone will immediately hand me a glass of champagne, and I'm like, oh, I don't actually drink alcohol, and um, it can make that really, really awkward. Where it's like I'm not trying to dictate what other people do or how other people might feel comfortable, but it's like no one has thought about my needs when I've entered a space, or the amount of times I've come into a space to talk about queer identities, and I am immediately assumed to be an ally and also not disabled. People asking me, "Oh, are you a carer for someone?" I'm like, "No, I am carer for myself, if that counts, but no, I'm talking about my own needs in this space." And I think, I mean, just to highlight as well in terms of being a trans person and talking about access, there's a lot to be had. I'm afraid to bring it up to start the discourse already, but about bathrooms. I'm so sorry. But when it comes to an accessible bathroom, I also have ulcerative colitis. I'm someone who needs access to a restroom. Um, but I don't look like I need access to a restroom, or I'm not perceived as someone that might need an accessible restroom. But at the same time, we see a lot of trans and non-binary people pushed to use accessible restrooms because we're not given correct access. We're not given the provisions that we need. And for the record, I'm perfectly happy for anyone to use a restroom whenever and wherever they need it. I have no qualms with someone who is quote unquote less disabled, whatever that means, than I am to use a restroom because I'd rather someone feel safe and welcome. There's actually a program in my local area where people are giving out radar keys to trans and non-binary people to have safe access to a restroom because things were quite dire and things continue to be dire, unfortunately. I've gotten quite grim there, but hopefully that gives you a bit of an oversight.
That's great. Thank you so much. And Sarah, maybe can I go to you?
Mm. Yeah, thanks. Intersectionality is really interesting. Excuse me. I know it gets seen as a bit of a buzzword, but I think for me, it's just that sense of how do I feel able to show up in a particular space and which parts of my identity are more present, which ones do I feel, excuse me, which parts of my identity do I feel I have to hide or mask a bit. So for me, and it's interesting to have some mentioned arthritis because that's one of my hidden disabilities. But when I walk into a room, people invariably see my blindness because my eyes are squished and don't open. I have a long white cane. And so in a way, that's the first thing people see. Oh, Sarah's blind, and it's all about what does Sarah need because she's blind. And in a way, my blindness almost initially puts people off, if you like, as a shield against my transness. Not that I'm at all ashamed of my transness. I'm not at all. And I think people, they see the blindness first and they don't necessarily see the transness. And that can be good, but it just can also have its additional pressures, its additional complications. And I think the really interesting thing for me with intersectionality is when you walk into a space, wherever that might be, and particularly at the minute when you have that radar going off about how much do I need to self-edit what I say, how I present, because, being trans has never been easy, but it's getting a lot harder. And so although, people see my blindness first, I'd never want to hide my transness. But equally, it's like, at what point do I have to disclose? Do I want to disclose? Now, obviously, that depends. If I'm in a queer space, that's fine. Although not always. So yeah, intersectionality is just really interesting. And I'm just really interested in how we experience it personally, and also the systems that go on in organizations that help us feel able to either be ourselves in the space or have to hide certain elements.
Great, thank you. And Bobby, may I move to you then next?
Yeah, thank you. I think Hafsa and Sarah have really covered it well, really. And I think intersectionality really, I think as Sarah says, is is very much turning into a buzzword now. But I think there's two sides of it. There's your intersectionalities are what makes you a whole person. What makes you you, and not just a single element of how you're seen. And I guess the other side of that intersectionality is how people perceive you as a person, whether they perceive you as a single entity or whether they perceive you as multiple entities. That is probably truer to your self. And I think the hidden disability conversation is a very important one because we know that there's a huge percentage of people in our society that have hidden disabilities. Immune disease, like arthritis, is extremely strong in my family. And my daughter suffers from rheumatoid arthritis and has done from 6 years old. I have, uh, and as I get older, an ever counting number of different conditions that you have to deal with. And actually, age is in itself an intersectionality. So I think it's really important, I think, as we talk about intersectionality, that we recognize that it's not just like intersectionality means that somebody is a person of color and gay. We're talking about a holistic thing, a real melting pot of all of those different identities that make up every single person in our society. And it's how do we allow those people to bring as much of themselves openly into our society as they can without discrimination and without abuse and some of the hatred that Hufsa mentioned just now, some of the horrific pushback we're seeing. How do we really empower people to feel comfortable about being themselves in society? Just as a final thing, there's a phrase that I've increasingly started to dislike, which is bring your whole self to work. And I really dislike that because what we should be saying is bring whoever you want to be to whatever situation.
Yeah.
There's no shame if you want to keep parts of you private, parts of the real self private at any instant, in any situation. And I think that's a really important thing to think about in terms of those intersectionality conversations as well.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for that. So I think we might move on now to some of our kind of specific topics that we talked about when we all met previously, that particularly there are some potentially unique experiences, but also in some cases disappointingly common experiences that people have, whether they're in the trans community or in the LGBTQI plus community at large, and or that experience any form of disability. And that's in healthcare. I think I might start in that domain and just ask kind of, many systems, especially healthcare, are kind of designed around a one size fits all model. But from your experience, kind of where do these systems fall short for trans people in particular, with additional intersecting identities as well? And what would you say maybe needs to change? I might start off with Sarah on that topic, please.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I've experienced healthcare a lot. I mean, part of my underlying condition is a type of rheumatoid arthritis. I was diagnosed with it at age 2, and I had various treatments. I had dozens of eye surgeries in my teens, and so I'm quite familiar with healthcare systems when it comes to disability. Some of it's got better, some of it's got worse. I mean, the biggest challenge for me is always access to information. Can I get sent letters and referral documents in an accessible format? Can I fill in the online system that my GP uses for an appointment? And so for me, that's my core experience. And then yeah, being trans just complicates even more. What information can I get? What do I have to disclose? If I'm in, excuse me, if I'm in a particular setting, for something to do with my vision or arthritis, how my transness sort of interact with how I'm perceived, what care I get, when I am worried at the minute, but if I ever need to go back into hospital for anything non-trans related, how will I be treated? Where will I be put if I have to stay in as an inpatient? So yeah, it's just a really interesting, well, more than double whammy, if you like. It's just an ongoing challenge of thinking about things need to be better, things need to change. And at the minute, particularly when it comes to trans-specific healthcare, I think things are just getting a lot worse.
Thank you. And Hudson, may I ask your viewpoint on this topic as well, specifically around healthcare?
Yeah, I think healthcare is a big one. I'm someone who's non-binary. When I enter a space again, like I'm often perceived to be cis. I think a lot of my records say that I'm cisgender, even though I've had to clarify with my doctors. Some of them have even asked me like, what's the difference? And I'm like, well, it matters to me. And I do a lot of work with student nurses and things like that. And a lot of the curriculum is, you know, person-centered care, patient-centered care. And it's like, how does the patient want to be addressed? How does the person, the service user, what do they need to feel welcome? And then when I go in as a patient, the experience is so disparate to what I'm then teaching to students. So it's really, really frustrating that we're not seeing that then follow through when it comes to actual patient care. In terms of healthcare as a whole, you get a lot of trans people who are not receiving adequate medical care. For example, if someone needs to have a smear test or their prostate checked and they're not getting called into those scans. I also have that on the other side as someone who is South Asian and Muslim, where I was giving a talk recently where I was saying I'm someone who needs to have a smear test every so often. And I'm often not told about that by my GP because they're like, oh, well, we know a lot of South Asian women because you're a woman, I'm not a woman. And so, don't go to those. So we thought we wouldn't flag it to you. And I'm like, I can see it on your screen. That should be flagged to me, regardless of how you've assumed I identify or what you've assumed my specific needs are. When we talk about healthcare for everyone, that includes access to that healthcare and being signposted in adequate ways. I should not have to be hyper aware of what my needs are to indicate to you, oh no, I do need this thing, or no, I do need this specific checkup or what have you. And someone who is sort of chronically ill, I'm in and out of hospital a lot more than I'd like. And it seems like day by day the change, it depends who you get on the day sometimes about what kind of care you might receive. And the conversations that I had, the amount of times I've been sat there where again people have assumed that I am this, that I am straight, all sorts of different things. I have children, all sorts of things. And I'll hear nurses talk about other patients, sometimes homophobic things, sometimes transphobic things. And it really hurts my heart because you've assumed that I want to be part of this conversation and that I'm also not part of the community that you're speaking about. I mean, there's many issues in and of itself regarding that because, obviously that's not appropriate in terms of my medical practitioners talking like that, but it has become so normalized, unfortunately, at least in the hospitals that I'm around and in. And it's really disheartening because I understand the need to want to kind of build rapport with each other, especially when you're at work, especially when I'm talking to student nurses and they're like, well, it's a long shift. And I'm like, how has that become mocking the patients or, not asking questions if you don't understand, and still being like, well, this is strange. We don't have time for this. The amount of times I've talked about sort of trans healthcare and I've been told, well, we don't have time in the NHS. We don't have time to address these concerns. I'm like, you are asking us, like when I go in for panels or things like for experts by experience or patient-centered care, where it's like you're asking us directly what we need from your services. We are telling you as trans people, as disabled people, as queer people, as all the different identities that we hold, as Bobby so eloquently said, we can't pick and choose what those are. We walk into the room with all of them. And we're not being seen as who we are. And as Bobby said, like just in regard to the bringing yourself to work context, I'm not the same person when I'm with my friends and we're playing board games and we're just showing each other cat memes versus when I'm at work and I'm giving a presentation or I'm talking to students. I am the same person, but I'm not going to talk to the same group of people. Different groups of people the same way because the context is different. And I wish that was understood a lot more.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, particularly in a healthcare environment when you're I mean, in any environment, it's wrong, but particularly in a healthcare environment where you're very vulnerable, and you might be feeling worried about a health condition, extra care needs to be taken. I might move us on to the next topic that we talked. We've already alluded to it a few times here, actually, and it was a nice segue what you just said, to move on to kind of the employment and access and kind of real allyship in employment environments. So, my question would be kind of when it comes to work and opportunity, what kinds of barriers have you experienced or seen for trans people with intersecting identities, and what does genuine allyship for employers look like in practice? I might move to Bobby for that question, please.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. I mean, it's going back to Hoofs was saying around uh, accessibility and opinion and the the frankly discrimination and abuse that trans people face, people of lots of different diversities as well. I mean, it's not just trans people that face the abuse. People of color face discrimination and abuse. People with disability, anybody that doesn't fit into that made up normal bracket that seems to sort of float above everything that society does faces discrimination and abuse. I think that for if I just look at being trans at the moment and look at the business environment, then the last report that we saw was the Crossland report in 2018, where things were shown to be pretty horrendous for trans and non-binary people. That has not got better. There may well be organisations that have started doing more training, although that's been tailing off very much in the last 18 months. But the situation for trans and non-binary people has not got any better. We're still seeing trans and non-binary people having nowhere near the success in interviews or even being invited into interviews than people that are perceived to be cisgender and straight and white as well. So we're seeing still a huge amount of discrimination for those people that are seeking employment. We also see a far lower wage for trans and non-binary people, especially around trans women after they transition. So we're seeing people that transition having multiple percentage drops in the amount of money that they're earning post-transition than pre-transition. How does that um, translate into real life experience? Well, I mean, speaking from my life experience, I first came out in the workplace in 2006, and I was high flying exec at the time. I was running all of the IT infrastructure for fourth biggest bank in the world. I had around about 250 staff. Was looking after multiple systems in multiple countries. And when my manager guessed I was trans, I lost my career overnight. Literally came into work on a Monday after I'd taken a week off in holiday and found that I'd been moved into a role in an office on my own, and my whole team had been given to somebody else.
Oh.
And we can say, things have changed in the last 20 years. Would that happen today? My gut feeling is, would that happen today? I don't think it would happen so blatantly and obviously as it happened to me. Would it happen today? Would trans and non-binary people be engineered out of roles? Would they be seen as less suitable for promotion? Would they be given less opportunity? Would they be seen as more troublesome, less reliable? Absolutely. Absolutely. We only have to look across industry in general to see that trans and non-binary people don't end up in senior positions.
Yeah.
They're not seen as valuable within businesses. And that's not unusual for people of diversity. We've seen big advances for people of colour, but still not enough. We've seen nowhere near as much pushback on discrimination and lack of opportunity for people with disabilities. We've seen, the Equality Act, people of disability says that you must make reasonable adjustments to enable people with disabilities to succeed, to be empowered in their employment. But what we've actually seen is those reasonable adjustments be reasonable for the employer, not be reasonable for the employee.
Yes,
What we've seen
there's a
in
lot of
those
nodding
12
going
years,
on for anyone who can't see
Mm,
the visible elements of this.
yeah, it's and we know that in law those adjustments must be objectively reasonable. But again, the bias is so swung towards business when it comes
mm.
to people of diversity. So it's it's so important for businesses to understand people of diversity are a gift, and people of diversity, yes, they may well need something different to be able to empower them. But just because they need something different doesn't mean that that's a detriment to business.
Absolutely. Can I add to that, Katie?
Yes, I was going to come to you next. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the picture that Bobby has just painted about, the experience of trans people is very real, it's very relevant. But I'll also give the example. So I'm totally blind. I've had, vision loss all my life to a varying degree. And I remember one of my first jobs was working for the major charity for blind people. And they used to always quote, we're talking here like, late 90s, they used to always quote the statistic that of those blind and partially sighted people of working age who are, had the skills, the knowledge to be in work, was a 75% unemployment rate. And here we are in 2026. I think progress has been made. That figure's now down to about 74%.
Mm.
Give or take. That's 1% in
Yeah.
30 years. And so, this is where intersectionality really does bite. If you are somebody who is disabled and trans, trans and a person of color, whatever, the different parts of your identity are, it really, really does have an impact. And a lot of that, as Bobby's just so brilliantly said, there is the law, there is reasonable adjustments. I've spent most of my career working in higher education and the public sector, and I think there is a willingness to do well. But ultimately, when it comes to it, it is still, yeah, what does the organization define as reasonable? And my own personal experience, I've done okay career-wise. I've worked in several major universities. I spent 6 years working at a leading UK university. I got to the level of, a senior leader, and it just shocked me that, even at that stage, with people that were supportive, wanted to help, there was just a constant lack of basic support and adjustments. Nobody was necessarily being malicious, but again, it's about the systems, that the systems were just not changing, or people weren't willing to change the systems to make sure I got the support that I needed. One very quick example, I'll finish. I was managing a team, but because I'm a screen reader user, I couldn't use the system they use to approve people's annual leave. So I'm the boss, but I couldn't go on and approve their annual leave. And I mentioned it several times that, oh yeah, well, sorry, but nothing changed.
Yep. Oh, Are you still there, Sarah?
Yes, yes, sorry, yes, I am. Sorry, yes.
No worries. No worries. I thought you suddenly became quiet and I wasn't sure whether you were done or whether you were
No,
finishing.
I am done. I am done. Apologies.
Okay. Yeah, I mean it's shocking, especially as technology has evolved. There are solutions and
Mm,
employers really need to step up and to take responsibility and have a duty of care and make it possible because it is possible for
mm,
like you were just the example you just gave. Managers can do their job in this day and
hmm
age. It's not as hard as perhaps they make it seem. So
I
it's
think
their responsibility.
and the thing is that the technology is almost always there,
Yeah,
mm,
yeah,
but what happens so many times is at that first stage of requirement gathering,
yeah,
it doesn't get thought
hmm
about. So
yeah,
actually, they only start thinking about it when they get a person of disability or a person of
yeah,
diversity further down the line, when they're past the point of commitment to
yeah,
say, well, this doesn't work.
yeah,
And at that stage, they can't change it. And then at that stage, there's no remediation that can be done. So if diversity was baked in at that requirements gathering stage, then not only wouldn't it be a problem for people of disability down the line, but it also wouldn't be any more costly to do.
yeah,
mm,
And that's all it takes is that one thought right at the start.
yeah.
absolutely. I just in the interest of time, like I feel like we could talk about this topic for all day. All of us probably could talk about all of the topics all day long. But I wanted to, maybe just move us on to another topic that we talked about in prep, and that so you've alluded to actually kind of in some of your earlier comments about kind of visibility, safety, kind of and identities being kind of politicized as well, or people making assumptions and having sharing certain views about communities based on their assumptions about you potentially. So my question is, there's often a tension between being visible and being safe, especially with identities having become really politicized and people having very strong personal views about them, even if it isn't particularly political. So, how have you navigated that? What impact does it have on kind of how you show up in different spaces?
Oh, that's a really good question. I'm just going to pass that in my head a little bit. Um, I think it's difficult because I think someone who's from like a South Asian background, from a Muslim community as well, there's a lot of cultural factors at play as well, where if I come into a space, I might be accepted for being Muslim or being a person of color, but when I add disability to it, when I add being trans to it, when I add being queer to it, that becomes more and more difficult. So I have to consider in a space, is it safe for me to be this visible? Am I going to be accepted here? Is that why I'm here? If I'm in a religious space and I just want to pray, do I need to talk about being queer? But at the same time, am I diminishing my identity by not kind of being that visual representation? And there's that kind of dichotomy between yourself of like, what do I represent when I'm here? I remember when I was using a walking stick, the amount of times where if people had not physically, literally seen my walking stick, they would assume I was not disabled. I remember using an accessible toilet and I was just coming out and someone was knocking insistently on the door. I was just coming out and like, this is for disabled people. And I just showed her my walking stick. I was like, I am disabled. So even when I was, visibly disabled, they still saw the hijab first. They saw my skin color first. They saw my age first, and they just immediately assumed I'm in a space I shouldn't be. And that frustrated me immensely because it's like I'm still doing everything I can to be visible in some way. Like I'll wear a lanyard, if you've seen the sunflower lanyards and things like that. They're still not considered because people still have their preconceived notions of what disability looks like, or what queerness looks like, or what all these identities together looks like. The amount of times where someone has told me I'm too young to be disabled, or hand waved my disabilities when I say I have arthritis. They're like, "Oh, do you have like they'll kind of downplay it, like, have you Googled that? Have you just diagnosed yourself with that?" I've heard this from healthcare professionals. I've heard it in professional spaces. It's remarkable the lack of knowledge there is about the range of disability and also the range in terms of trans identities and inclusion, where my gender expression, sorry to go on a bit of a tangent, but my gender expression sometimes relies on what my body can do that day. I'm someone who would love to bind my chest a bit more, but I physically can't at times because I'm limited somewhat by how able-bodied I am, and my care needs can differ day to day as well. So someone might see me today and they might think, oh, this person seems very well. You might see me a week later and I'm exhausted, I'm out of breath, I can't get out of bed because that's how things are for me. My needs can change. And that is very challenging for people who aren't familiar with disability or the range of disability or chronic illness or other conditions where they've just assumed you're either disabled or not disabled, and that those needs don't change. And unfortunately, that's quite a shock for some people if they suddenly become disabled later in life or something were to happen to them, or unfortunately around the pandemic, some people were very new to conditions like long COVID and chronic fatigue. And it was a real shock to them to be like, oh, this is what I'm going to be treated like from now on by people who do not understand what this is, who think that my chronic fatigue is just, oh, you're just tired and you need a nap. Um, or unfortunately, I think sometimes there's this, I mean, this is just me speaking anecdotally, being in the charity sector, there's this kind of feeling of just get up and go, just work harder, keep pushing. And that doesn't really align well with my ways of working or what is comfortable for me or my body or even my mental health. Where it's like you want to do as effective work as possible, but at the same time, if you're pushing everyone to work in the same way you deem appropriate, is that going to suit everyone's needs? When, if I'm someone who is more active at a specific time of day, am I a less effective employee if I work during those hours instead of your dictated hours, or if I've asked you for a specific access need, or all that kind of stuff? If I've requested some accessible equipment, is that too much of a drain on the finances? It kind of brings back to what Bobby and Sarah were saying about the technology and things are there, but there's such a lack of understanding. You are often designated the expert on all of the conditions that might be relevant to you. And that is extremely daunting if you're very new to being disabled or you're not quite familiar with your conditions, or you have to have a lot of knowledge about it. And it can be really, really daunting um, to
Yeah,
suddenly be put in that position. And I think just to add as well, you end up being the expert on queerness and your own trans identity too. Because when I go and speak about my identity, I'm not just speaking about myself. I am, for some reason, representing every single queer Muslim, which is a lot of pressure. I do not represent every queer Muslim. I'm extremely privileged. That affects how I show up and how I enter these spaces and the type of access I have compared to someone else who is not out and doesn't have those resources. So that's a big challenge as well.
yeah. Well, you not only have to be an expert on yourself, but also on the law and the policy in the environment you're in. So yeah, it's a very high bar to get what you need. May I come to you next, Bobby, on your perspective on the question around kind of visibility, kind of safety, the political environment, and how identities are being politicized at the moment?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, in the UK at the moment, and in many countries around the world, um, trans and non-binary people are being very much the punch bag for anybody that wants to roll back human rights and rights for all diversities. Um, I'm Funnily enough, I had a conversation with one of my friends the other day. There's this hideous concept that I've always hated called passing. That's especially relevant if you're a trans woman. If you fit into that box of what society deems acceptable for a woman to look like, then you're treated better than if you don't.
Yeah.
And one of my friends, who funnily enough has, my gender identity is actually very non-binary. I'm very much on the cusp of being female or non-binary, and I very much changes day to day, but I very much typically lean more into being non-binary these days. Now I've settled in my gender identity. I think it's a very important thing when you do transition is to allow yourself to settle where you want to settle, not where you think you should be. So one of my friends doesn't fit into this hideous passing concept, but has a far more feminine gender than I do, far, far more. Um, uh, and one of the things she said to me is why do you still keep doing what you do? Because you could just vanish. You could just vanish into the crowd and not have any of the abuse, any of the hassle, any of it.
Mm.
Like, and it's true. If I wanted to, I could do that. But I think well, for me at least, I can't stand. I've never been able to stand injustice in any form
Yeah.
at all. And I think I just wouldn't be able to do it. I would not be able to sit there and see any diversity experience the type of injustice that we're seeing across society at the moment and keep my mouth shut. So I do carry on. But I think the important thing to remember is that what we're seeing at the moment. So we may well be seeing trans and non-binary people being flamed in terms of the media, in terms of society, flamed and blamed, actually. But we're just an ends to a mean, and means to an end, sorry. What they want to do is remove the Equality Act, because if they remove the Equality Act, then that opens the door to doing whatever the hell they like to anybody, and actually not even just those people of diversity and those people of protected characteristics under the Equality Act. It opens the floodgates to treating anybody as worthless and throwaway. And so, we need to be really loud, and we need to be really careful to try and come together as all diversity types. And we see it, we see the abuse, we see the discrimination everywhere, especially as trans and non-binary people, and actually people with disability see that as well. Coming back to one thing that Hafsa was saying earlier, my daughter has had juvenile arthritis first of all, and now rheumatoid arthritis in later life. And actually, our society is geared up to give empathy, and our health service actually is geared up for people with acute illness. If you go out and break your leg, you will have absolutely everybody empathizing with you, sending you get well soon cards,
Mm.
hoping that you're better, asking you whether your leg's painful, how you're coping, how long is it going to be before you're back to normal. If you have a chronic illness, you soon find that people lose interest, lose patience, just, oh, I've given you empathy. You haven't made it any better. Will you just get on with it now and shut up? That's the type of thing you get. And you see the same thing in healthcare. If you go into hospital and you have an acute problem, they are absolutely fabulous. If you go in with a chronic condition, they're absolutely fabulous for about the first 3 months, and then it starts slowly tailing off, and you get less interest, you get less care. You have to start pushing more and more, using more and more energy to
Mm.
try and get the treatment that you need. And that's at a time when you have less energy because you're suffering from chronic illness. So it's that vicious cycle. So our whole um, our whole society is geared up to put these pressures on people with different diversities and different challenges in life.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I know we're coming towards the end of our time, so I might kind of steer us to our last question that I'd love to put to each of us or each of you on the panel, and kind of thinking about kind of looking forward, what needs to change, and what we would ask of those allies around us. So if you could change one thing, whether it's in healthcare, workplaces, society more broadly, to better support trans people who are disabled and have other intersecting identities, what would it be? And I don't know if anyone particularly wants to go first and has their hand up on this subject. Maybe Sarah, you haven't spoken in a
Yeah,
little
I
while. Is
think,
that okay?
gosh, one thing. I think for allies, it really is about remembering that to be an ally is an active verb. It's a doing word. You
Yeah.
know, it's great if you're somebody that is supportive and everything, but I think this really is the time for allies to do something. Now, by that, that doesn't mean you have to be the one going on protests or writing letters to MPs. I mean, they're great, and I would encourage people to do that if they feel able to it. You know, I'm not saying that allies do something totally out their comfort zone, but what I'd also say is, as an ally, you know, any discomfort you might be experiencing is nothing like what those being faced by the communities that you're seeking to be an ally to. So I'm not saying as an ally you should put yourself in a place where you don't feel safe, or you know where you might experience difficulty, hostility. But if you really want to be an ally, this is the time to, you know, speak up, stand up, um, just be there. And also to be an ally, you really do need to take the time to listen to the community. Sadly, I see too many people, probably more in the disability community, because I experience this more when I'm out and about. They think they know about disability. They might have met another blind person and they think, great, I'm an expert on blindness. Like, no, you're not. No, you're not. So, you know, be an ally, be active, you know, speak up, stand up, but also take your time to listen to the community, the, you know, trans community, disability community, any community. Don't ever use your voice instead of somebody from that community. And sadly, we see that too much from people who think, you know, self-confessed experts that have no real experience of these things. So that's probably what I'd say in terms of allyship.
Thank you so much. And may I come to Hefsa next on this question about
Yeah,
kind of
sure.
one thing that you'd like people to do to help support the community?
And unfortunately, just going to echo what Sarah said exactly, of just listen to us. I mean, the amount of times where people make assumptions about what my needs are, what other people's needs are. Listen to what we're saying. And if you're not familiar with the community, Google is free. Like, you can go to the internet, you can learn about other communities. For someone who doesn't use one, have you ever tried using a screen reader? Have you ever used voice dictation? Have you ever looked at your website and thought how someone else might use it compared to how you might use it? Have you thought about other people's access needs? And if you don't know, what can you learn about these communities? The amount of people who, like, in terms of not being familiar with disability or even being familiar with trans identities and communities, there's so many resources out there now where you don't need to turn to the one disabled person you know, or the one trans person you know, go, okay, I have all my questions, here's 100 questions, because they're not there as a living resource for you. We don't exist to answer. I realize the irony of this on a panel answering questions, but I mean, day to day, the average person isn't. You're putting a lot of pressure on that one person to speak for every single community. Please do look for resources out there before you turn to the person right next to you. But if they are turning to you and saying, hey, I need this support. Hey, can you be an ally for me? Hey, I'm struggling with this thing. Listen to them and support them in that issue. For example, Sarah, when you mentioned, you know, that your the HR system you're using not being accessible for the leave thing, I'd hoped that there were allies who were saying, well, why hasn't this been resolved? My manager can't approve my leave. This is absurd. Fix this issue now, and pushing it forward. Because sometimes you feel like you're the only person out there kind of pushing your case forward. And that can be really challenging when everyone else around you does not struggle with the same issues, because they'll be like, well, we've not had a problem. I'm sure many of us have heard that before. Well, it doesn't affect me, so therefore it's not really an issue. Well, this community is so small, I don't know why it bothers them. When you're talking about huge swathes of people, you just assume that this community is small. The amount of times I introduce myself as a queer Muslim to someone, they're like, oh, I've never met a queer Muslim before, or I bet there's only like one of you. And I'm like, no, there's a lot of queer Muslims out there. I'm just the extremely privileged one that is completely out. There's not that many of us because it's dangerous. Like, and not many people have the same privileges that I do. That doesn't mean we don't exist. So yeah, just looking out for resources and talking to us and listening to us. Sorry to, again, to just echo everything Sarah said, but yeah.
No, that's great. And Bobby, what's your view on this topic?
Well, I'm just going to echo what Hafsa and
It was great
Sarah have
advice.
said. Really, it's hugely great advice. I think I mean just to follow on from what Hafsa was saying, actually, that just one of the messages is just stop being complacent. The amount of times I go on a panel and there's a gay white man there on the panel, and they'll say as though it's some kind of prize, like, I'm gay, but I don't feel I need to broadcast it at work because
Mm,
it's just so completely accepted.
yeah.
And it's just like and it drives me up the wall because I call them out on it. The reason they're in that position is because over the last 50 years and longer, people have put themselves in danger. People have lost their jobs. People have lost their careers because they've made themselves visible to move things forward. And now you're in that place of privilege and you're just throwing it away. So stop being complacent about your rights. Understand the struggle to get your rights to the position they are and really defend them. But I think one thing for me, if I could change one thing, it would be it's humans in general celebrate diversity in every single species on Earth. It's David Attenborough's 100th birthday yesterday. Everybody was waxing lyrical about the amazing things that he's done over his career, over the things that he's brought to the public in terms of the diversity and beauty of nature. You can go out into woodland, that I do a lot, and you can see just beautiful variations in single species, let alone all the multitude, the millions of different species there are on Earth. And we celebrate them and we love them and we get such joy from it. And we do that for every single species on Earth except humans.
Mm.
When it comes to humans, we're expected to be one thing, to fit in one box. And actually, if there was one thing I could change, it would be that every human looked at the diversity in the human species and felt the same joy and the same love and the same wonder,
Mm.
diversity that's in humans.
Oh, I think that's a beautiful note to end things on. That's actually just given me goosebumps. I love
Mm.
that. And I love David Attenborough. So
Yeah.
like I'm just feeling very warm and fuzzy right now after all of that. Thank you so much. I want to thank all of our panelists today, as well as Lynn, our BSL interpreter. Thank you so much for being so open and sharing your experiences with us. I think this was a very important panel and gave us lots of insight into lived experience of this community. So thank you very much. We're going to be posting this on our YouTube channel. And hopefully everyone will have a chance to look at it afterwards. But we really appreciate you sharing your views, and hopefully we'll do this something like this again next year. Have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone.
Thanks
Thank
so
you.
much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.